All right, welcome back for the Star Trek Rewatch. Today we're going to be doing the second pilot episode, which is Where No Man Has Gone Before. Now, before I get into this, I wanted to make a correction to the previous entry, which was Charlie X. We're doing a running crewman death count here. And last time I said that I thought that Sam died, okay? That Charlie winked him into non-being. But I checked Memory Alpha after a few comments below, and Memory Alpha, which is the Star Trek wiki, says that everything was restored as before. This was pointed out by Bing Lamb, so I went and checked Memory Alpha, and indeed Bing was right. So nobody died in that last episode. So that means that we've only had 4 crewmen deaths. Those all occurred in the man trap. So we're gonna have a high body count in this episode. So let's get into it. By the way, this is the second pilot. So there was a pilot which is called The Cage, which didn't air until the 1980s. And then this was the second pilot that was ordered up. The original captain was played by Jeffrey Hunter. It was Captain Pike. So here we have William Shatner. You'll notice that the uniforms in this episode are different than the ones we've seen previously. They're more in line with the uniforms from that original pilot, kind of muted colors. We're going to have the first appearance of Scotty, played by James Doohan, and we're going to have the first appearance of Sulu in this episode, appearing, George Takei. Although George Takei's not wearing the gold uniform in this one, he's in the science division, which is kind of strange. I guess they're moving people around. They don't have the show worked out yet. This is the pilot, but we do have Kirk, played by William Shatner, and Spock. Okay, both of those are staples of the series. But Spock is a return. I think he's the only person that's returning from that original pilot. Okay? But we'll go through the cast list here real quick. So we've got Paul Carr, who plays Lee Kelso, Lieutenant Lee Kelso. He is the navigator of the ship. And interestingly, he would go on to do some voice work for English dubs and anime. He's got credits on the 1988 film Akira. He's got credits on Cowboy Bebop. He's got credits on Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex. So that's interesting. We also have actor Lloyd Haynes here, who plays Lieutenant Alden in this episode. And he would go on to be in a lot of stuff, but one of the things I found interesting was he appeared in the 1966 Batman, as in the episodes King Tut's Coup and Batman's Waterloo as the character Lord Chancellor. We have Paul Fix as the doctor here, Dr. Mark Piper. Paul Fix in a lot of westerns, okay? You would recognize him if you've ever watched The Rifleman with Chuck Connors. Paul Fix played the sheriff in the town on that series. Then we've got Gary Lockwood. Gary Lockwood is playing in this episode Lieutenant Commander Gary Mitchell. And you would recognize Gary Lockwood from Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, where he played Dr. Frank Poole. We also have Sally Kellerman in this episode as Dr. Elizabeth Daner. She was in the movie version of MASH as Hot Lips Houlihan. She was in a lot of stuff. I mean, she was working for a long time. One of the movies I recognize her from is Rodney Dangerfield's Back to School. Then as Yeoman Smith in this episode, we have Andrea Dram. She would be replaced by Grace Lee Whitney as, Janice Rand. And then Janice Rand will eventually drop out of the series. She wasn't in very many, but the original yeoman here was Andrea Dram. So we'll get into the episode synopsis. This may go just a tad bit longer than usual. I'm still going to try to keep the time down, but I mean, we're already 5 minutes in, so we'll jump into the synopsis. So we've got the USS Enterprise, while patrolling the area near the outer boundary of our galaxy, beams aboard the flight recorder of the Valiant, a galactic survey vessel that had visited this area almost 2 centuries before the Enterprise. The survey vessel, upon attempting to leave our galaxy, had come into contact with an energy barrier that disabled the ship and killed some of the crew. One of the crew, however, survived serious injury from the barrier. From this point, the tape's information is garbled. Spock's listening to like the flight recorder, I guess, and is getting all this information from there. The Valiant's captain requested data on extrasensory perception, ESP, and eventually self-destructed his own ship. So, extrasensory perception, psychic abilities, the ability to read other people's minds and whatnot. This is, in this episode, the characters have Esper readings, okay? They, on their like charts, their medical charts, scores how high they score on ESP. So that's a thing. Captain Kirk decides to move forward. Okay, he's gonna try to cross the energy barrier, and the Enterprise contacts the same glowing purple barrier that had disabled the Valiant. Kirk orders the ship to back out of the energy field. While the starship escapes the barrier, unknown radiations penetrate the ship, causing short circuits in key equipment. Several crewmen are killed, and 2 are knocked unconscious. So we get a death count here right off the bat. 9 crew members die trying to penetrate this energy barrier. It's a lot. We see like panels on the Enterprise explode and catch on fire. Many people have commented on this over the years. They like make fun of it because they're essentially like there's no fuses in the panels on the Enterprise. Lieutenant Commander Gary Mitchell, a friend of Kirk's from his academy days, seems uninjured, although his eyes now glow a bright silver. So Gary Lockwood here has these silver contact lenses in. They have like a little pinhole in them that he could see through, and he had a hard time seeing, so that's why he's kind of got his head tipped back for a lot of the episodes, which kind of gives him an air of arrogance. But I guess these contacts did some damage to his eyes. So everybody needs to be thankful for this actor's performance, because it did long time damage to his vision. But his eyes now glow silver. Dr. Elizabeth Daner, psychiatrist, is also knocked out for a moment, but seems completely normal afterwards. Now, Kirk and Spock both determine that the ESP quotient of Gary Mitchell is extremely high, and Dr. Daner's is almost as high. In fact, everybody that died, the 9 crewmen that died, were all people that scored high on their ESP evaluations. In sickbay, Kirk learns that Mitchell's feeling completely well. He is reading material he has never understood before. His comprehension seems complete, and his reading speed is incredible. He's like speed reading everything on the ship's tapes. Showing off to Dr. Daner, Mitchell plays dead, stopping all his bodily functions for almost a full minute. We see all the gauges on the monitoring equipment drop to 0, and then he comes back. All right. Kirk calls a meeting of the Enterprise department heads. Physicist Sulu. So here we have Sulu's not the helmsman. He's a physicist in this. He's wearing blue, although it's a light blue. The colors of the uniforms in this episode are more muted than they would be. They're much brighter, as we've seen in the previous 2 we've already watched. Again, this is the second pilot. But Sulu is the physicist here, and he predicts that Mitchell's powers will develop at an astounding rate. In fact, he uses the analogy of if you take a penny and you doubled it every day, by the end of the month, you'd be a millionaire. And that's something you could try. I mean, actually do this, calculate out the math, double it every day. And yeah, it's astounding how quickly it gets to over 1 million. But Spock says that it's actually Gary Mitchell's powers are progressing faster than this. Okay, that it's actually not even going to take that long. And Mr. Spock actually suggests that Kirk should kill Mitchell. He cautions him not to wait too long like the captain of the Valiant. Now Kirk decides to change course for Delta Vega, an uninhabited planet with an automated lithium cracking station that can aid in repairing the ship's warp drive engines that were damaged within the barrier. Mitchell's sedated and transported to the planet, which is kind of funny because Paul Fix here as Dr. Piper gives him a huge old shot. I mean, that thing goes forever. It's like, it was like probably enough tranquilizer to knock out a horse, but Gary Mitchell doesn't fall down. He's still standing. When they place him on the transporter pad, like he doesn't fall over, which is kind of funny. I guess he's just kind of dazed. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but they beam him down. Everybody beams down to the planet, and then they confine him in a hastily constructed brig. Gary escapes. He kills crewman Kelso. So actually he's like in the holding facility or whatever, and he's like psychically seeing Kelso with his mind, and he causes this cable to come up and go around his neck and strangle him. So we have another crewman death. That brings the total to 10 deaths in this episode. And then Kelso escapes. He takes Dr. Daner with him. Now, her eyes have now turned silver. She's beginning to mutate. Armed with a phaser rifle, because Spock has a phaser rifle beamed down to the planet, Spock tells Dr. Piper, don't wake up Spock. He's like, I'm going to go after Mitchell, and if I don't report in, like basically, you're going to have to report to Starfleet and like blow this planet up, essentially. Kirk goes after Gary, who paves the road to him with landslides and other perils. Kirk urges Dr. Daner. Actually, Gary Mitchell's like, go to him and see how insignificant he is. So she comes and talks to Kirk, and they have this speech about, God needing compassion, and basically Kirk warns her that eventually there'll only be one of you because you'll turn on each other. This whole idea of absolute power corrupting absolutely. Well, Kirk urges Dr. Daner to use her psychological skills to determine whether Gary Mitchell is compassionate and sane enough to survive with these awesome powers. As Mitchell's preparing to kill Kirk, Elizabeth she fires charges of her own energies into Gary. So she uses like force lightning, like she's the Emperor in Star Wars, like zzz, zzz, which temporarily reverts Gary Mitchell back to being, his eyes turn back brown, and he seems to have momentarily lost his powers. So this Kirk starts beating the snot out of him. We get a good old fashioned Donnybrook, right? Kirk beating him down with Kirk chops, which I love it. He's the Shatner chop. Well, he can't kill Gary. He stops himself. He's getting ready to smash his head with a rock, and Mitchell reverts back to his powers. Like the moment has passed, and slaps Kirk aside. Now he's produced an empty grave, and he tops it with a stone that reads James R. Kirk. Of course, we'd learn later on that it's James T. Kirk, but here in this early episode, it's R. And fans have tried to explain this, but actually, they retcon it later on, okay? And it changed the R to a T. Which we don't learn that Kirk's name is James Tiberius Kirk in the series. It's actually the animated series is the first use of James Tiberius Kirk. And then I think Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, when Kirk is on trial with the Klingons, is when they use it in a live action version for the first time. We get Kirk's full name, James Tiberius Kirk. But Mitchell, before he can kill Captain Kirk, Kirk picks up the phaser rifle, because they both fall into the grave, and then Kirk gets out. He hops out, grabs the phaser rifle, shoots at the cliff face, causing a rock slide to come down, kills Gary Mitchell, and Mitchell's crushed in the grave meant for Kirk. And Dr. Elizabeth Daner dies, presumably because she expelled so much energy in the fight, or somehow, I don't know why she dies. She just dies from the strain. Aboard the Enterprise, Kirk records that crewmen Kelso, Mitchell, and Daner all died in the performance of their duties, and Mr. Spock indicates human emotions, expressing grief for Gary Mitchell. He says, I felt for him too. And then Kirk's like, perhaps just hope for you after all, Mr. Spock. Well, there's a little note in here. It says when shooting had begun on this episode, which was filmed on they started shooting on July 19th, 1965. Jeffrey Hunter was unavailable. So they had to look for somebody else to fill that role. And they got William Shatner. Now, I think that William Shatner is better than Jeffrey Hunter. That's my opinion. I mean, Jeffrey Hunter was fine in the cage, but I just love Shatner's, acting. It's great. Sometimes it's a little hammy, but it's always entertaining, okay? Where I think Jeffrey Hunter he's a fine actor, but he's not Captain Kirk. William Shatner is way more charismatic than Captain Pike was. So Shatner gets cast in the role, and we have Leonard Nimoy returning, although Spock is a little bit still, he's kind of shouty. His eyebrows seem a little bit more angular than they were later on. The makeup's not quite worked out. You can see his eyes, like Mr. Spock's eyebrows, kind of twinge down more than they do. You got the high collar uniforms in this one. But this is it's filming for this one. Let's see. The first draft of this script was done on May 27th of 1965. The final draft was in June of 65. They began filming this on July 19th of 1965, and it was filmed pretty much in the middle and late June of that year. The production credits was produced by Gene Roddenberry. We have writer for this episode was Samuel A. Peebles, who would actually come back and write the first episode of the animated series. Okay, the director was James Goldstone. The associate producer is Roger H. Justman. We have the music was composed and conducted by Alexander Courage, who also did the theme music. The director of photography was Ernest Haller. Let's see, who did the sound? I'm looking for the photographic effects. So photographic effects here were done by Howard A. Anderson Company. We haven't talked about Desilu as of yet, okay? But we will end up talking about Desilu, Lucille Ball, and Desi Arnaz really being responsible for a lot of this show being made. We'll get into that at some point, but this has already run over pretty long, and I don't want this to... I'm trying to keep these short, but being this is a second pilot, it did go longer today. But I think this is a great episode. I really... It's missing... The one thing it's missing, though, is DeForest Kelley as Dr. McCoy. Paul Fix is great, okay? I'm not taking anything away from Paul Fix, but Dr. Piper is no Dr. McCoy. It's really the dynamic between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy is the heart of the show. And we do get the relationship between Kirk and Spock like pretty much right off the bat. These guys, on-screen chemistry, they're great together. But you really need Dr. McCoy on this show. It's those three characters that make this thing. I mean, I think that's the reason why Star Trek is still so popular is not just because it's science fiction. I mean, I'll be real with you. A lot of the science fiction in this show doesn't really hold up by today's standards. A lot of the stuff looks cheesy, but it's the acting and the relationships of the characters are what people come back for. No offense to The Cage with Jeffrey Hunter, but I mean that Dr. Boyce and him, I mean it's just not that entertaining. I mean, yes, it's got a cerebral concept going on to it, and the science fiction aspect of it is cool, but it's kind of boring, in my opinion. Now, don't come at me, man. Maybe you like it. I'm not saying I don't like The Cage, but, you know, and we'll get to see The Cage. One of the reasons why I didn't do The Cage is because we're going to see it come up, cut into 2 episodes, the Menagerie Part 1 and 2, where they're going to splice in that pilot footage. But I think that right off the bat, when you watch this episode, and this did air this is the third in broadcast order, but it's really the first episode of Star Trek. I really think that they nailed it. The one thing that we don't see here is the uniforms aren't totally dialed in yet. The women are wearing pants, and I think probably the producers looking at this show said, make the uniforms brighter, because we're going to see the colors get brightened up. You know, the brown is going to go away. Like Scotty's wearing like a light brown or tan uniform. So the engineering division is wearing brown. That's going to switch to red. We're going to get our red shirts. And then the women's pants are going to go away. Right now they're all wearing pants. Some sleazy producer sitting around saying, you know what, we really need some sex appeal on this show, kid. I like what you've done here, but can we maybe put some mini skirts and go-go boots on these girls? What do you think? So yeah, they do that. So they bring in the mini skirts and the go-go boots, which is totally impractical, but the totally impractical, I can't say the word. Sorry, it's morning. I haven't had enough coffee. Impractical. Never mind. I'm going to drop it. All right. Thanks for watching. What do you think about this one? Sorry this one went so long. Next time we'll get back to our 10 minutes mark. But I like this one. I like seeing Shatner do his, you know, cha-cha. Of course, we get the ripped shirt. Oh, I forgot to do the final tally on the death count. We had the 9 people that died in the galactic barrier. Then Kelso gets strangled out, so that brings it to 10. And then we had Mitchell and Daner die. That brings the death total for this episode, 12 crew members. That is a lot. Okay? That's a lot. And then combined with the man trap, our total running death count on the show right now, crew member wise, we're only counting crew deaths, is 16. So 16 crew deaths in the 3 that we've watched. All right, thank you for watching. And until next time, live long and prosper and have a wonderful day.